Everyone, and thank you for joining our second AgileLIVE webinar series on how to accelerate Agile adoption with a scaled Agile framework. My name is Lee Cunningham. I'm an Enterprise Agile Coach with VersionOne, and I'm going to be hosting today's event. Now, for everyone who listened to the webinar last week featuring Dean Leffingwell, we learned that the scaled Agile framework is a great option to consider if you're looking for innovative approaches to scale faster and easier and smarter. During today's webinar, Andy Powell, who is a product evangelist and a scaled Agile framework program consultant with VersionOne, is going to show you how to use SAFe and VersionOne together to implement SAFe effectively in your organization.
Muted.
There we go. Before we get started, I'd like to review a couple of housekeeping items. This presentation is going to last about 40 minutes, and it's going to be followed by a Q&A session. And for those of you who haven't used GoToWebinar before, you'll notice that up at the top, the control panel at the top left-hand side, there is a orange button with an arrow on it. And for those of you who have probably figured out already, we've advanced one slide further than we need to, so we'll just leave it here for right now. You can click this button, and that will enable you to collapse that control panel if it gets in your way and you need to get some more real estate there in your browser. Now, all of your lines are going to be muted throughout this presentation, so if you have any questions, you can send them in using the questions area in the control panel. And at the end of the presentation, we're going to be answering as many questions as we have time for. So we want to say thanks to all of you who submitted questions in advance. And during the course of the webinar, we're probably going to answer most of those questions, if not all of them. But if there are some of those that are not answered throughout the course of the webinar, we'll be answering those at the end. Now, finally, today's webinar is being recorded. So we're going to be sending you an email with a link to review the recording of today's event. So on that note, let's go ahead and get started. So this big picture should be familiar to you if you were or familiar at all with SAFe, whether via last week's webinar or if you've been following along with this over the last couple of years, or maybe you've been to one of the classes. So we're going to look at this, not going to drill down on the big picture right now, but just want to put this back up and recognize the fact that we'll be looking at VersionOne through the lens of using it to actually manage portfolios, programs, and teams according to the practices that are actually depicted here on the big picture. We want to start off with a team at the bottom of the stack from the big picture. And this is referred to as the kind of the bottom level or the core of what we're scaling. So if we understand what happens at the team level, and most organizations, if they're looking at scaled Agile, they understand what's happening with their Scrum teams or with their XP teams or down at just the cross-functional team level. The scaled Agile framework emphasizes three core themes, one of those being the value, and one of those being the team, and one of those being time box. And as we go throughout this, as we did with Leffingwell's webinar last week, we're going to look at how those are scaled once and then scaled twice from the team and up through the program and then up to the portfolio. So not to drill down on this and belabor this anymore, just want to set the context. I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Andy Powell. And Andy's going to talk about VersionOne and specifically how VersionOne is used to support the team level in the SAFe model.
So thanks Lee, and everyone. I'm looking forward to walking through VersionOne a little bit with you today. This week I've actually been at the Gartner conference on PPM. And so what we're starting to see is we've got frameworks like SAFe that are available. We've also got a lot of the analysts at Gartner telling everyone they should move more towards a program-type thinking and move away from project thinking, so that's aligning pretty well with SAFe. And this is a space that VersionOne's been focused on supporting for quite some time. So before we jump in and look at the team level, since I realize some of you may be new to VersionOne, I wanted to provide some context for what we're looking at, and this will, I think, be helpful as we continue the demonstration today. And if you're a current customer, you may notice some slight tweaks to the labeling in version 1. I've set up this labeling to really align much closer to safe. And this is something that you can do within version 1 is match your current terminology. So to start off and provide some context, I wanted to just walk you through this sample company we're looking at here within version 1. And this is looking at the planning tree. So the planning levels in version 1 represent the different types of planning that occur for software development. And SAFE kind of outlines those levels as being at the top level being your portfolio. And this planning tree, you may have multiple portfolios in your company, so the planning tree can be built out as wide and as deep as you need. But you'll have some level that represents your portfolio and contains your epics. And then beneath that, you'll start to have your programs. So this is your place where you do your feature level planning. In this case, we have a product suite for Easy Support Inc. And within that product suite, there's 3 different smaller products that make up the program and work together on a release train. And so there's planning that's done for each of those products, and then they'll decide what's in a particular PSI. So those different types of planning that occur as you're moving through the process are represented within the planning tree. Then also in version 1, you have your work breakdown structure, right? Your backlog breakdown. And so that can be seen here from the backlog tree. And right now I'm looking at the portfolio level. So what I'm seeing is all of my business and architectural epics that have been identified. And if we drill into a business epic, we can see how that can be broken down into a feature, and then those features can be further broken down into the stories and defects that make up that feature. And so if I'm at the portfolio level, I'll be looking at my portfolio backlog. If I drill in and look at my program level, then now the type of items I'm looking at is just my features, so I'm able to focus in on that program backlog. And if I keep further drilling down and go down into the product level for one of the products, I'll see a list of features that have been designated for that product. And then if I want to view the team backlog, and I'm getting more into the really granular product owner type role, I can go look at the entire team backlog for a particular team. So hopefully that gives you some insight into just the overall constructs that we'll be talking about in version 1 today. So now I wanted to go in and dive into the process that Agile team would use as they go ahead and take their backlog and then deliver those stories and manage the process of delivering those stories within their sprints. And so right now I'm looking at the call center backlog for the entire product. And one of the first things you can do within version 1 is prioritize your work. So no matter what backlog you're looking at, you're able to drag and drop items, move them up and down to convey what should get done first. And that's a really important thing because the team always knows what's going to happen first and what's the highest priority. When you're going ahead and planning out your PSI, the release scheduling page provides a view where, as a product owner, you can start taking the backlog items from your product backlog and start outlining which PSI you want them to be a part of. And so this allows me to see the work that's not yet scheduled to a PSI, and I can drill in to understand what items have already been scheduled. Once you've got that, the defects and the stories that are out there that you want in your PSI, you're then kind of ready for your sprint planning. And so within the sprint scheduling section, you're now taking the work from the PSI that you're focused on. So PSI, again, potential shippable increment, kind of thinking about your release for those of you who are new to SAFE. And you can take those backlog items that you've said you want to get done in the PSI and start scheduling those out to the different sprints by just dragging them up to include them. So as you're doing that, you can start to see how your work lays out across the sprints. Once that overall planning is done and you get a feeling for what you can get done and which sprints throughout the PSI, then you get into the mode of wanting to do the sprint planning, that very detailed planning the team will do for a particular sprint. and that's done here on the detail planning page. And so as part of the sprint planning meeting, what the teams can go through and do is take a particular story and get a focused view where they can talk about what are the tasks that we would need to perform in order to deliver this intra-RMA story, and also what is that additional acceptance criteria that we want to make sure is captured. So the product owner may have captured these tests in version 1 earlier in the process, and a test is a place where you can capture a title and then the behavior you're looking for. So if we look at a particular test for Enter RMA, we've captured a behavior that says, just given a certain situation, when I do this, then what should the system do? So by capturing the tests and having that discussion around the story during sprint planning, the team leaves with a good feeling for what are we really trying to get done, what does done mean for this story, and then how are we going to work together to deliver those items. And so VersionOne has a process flow that really helps the team work together to move through the process as you move through the navigation. But once you get finished with the sprint planning meeting, what we've found is the developers want an interface that's really focused on what they're doing. So day-to-day interaction, let me get into VersionOne very quickly and really have a space that shows me just what I want. And that's the idea behind our team rooms. So if you're going to have a tool that your development teams really find valuable and engage them in tracking their work and collaborating, team rooms can go a long way into helping with that adoption. So within the team room, I can see a task board that represents all the work in the sprint. So here I have a row for Enter RMA, and we can see all the tasks. I'm also able to see who's on the team and filter by just clicking on an individual to that particular individual's work. Now, as Andre, if I wanted to sign up for something and help Alfred with his design component, then I can go ahead and choose to sign myself up. If we work on it together, I can track that work. So if we both spent an hour on creating this design, I can go ahead and track that. And eventually I'll be moving my tasks to the completed status, closing those out to kind of remove them from the board. And we'll eventually start closing out our stories. So all that tracking of progress is done here within the team room. It's very easy for the developers. I'm also able to have conversations on what's going on with this story. So although you had your sprint planning meeting, once the development team starts to really get into delivering the story, and they're going to discover new things that weren't discussed in sprint planning. So you might want to start a conversation around something you learned. So, I might ask the question, well, how do we handle the order? Because we didn't actually talk about that, and there's a couple of options. And Klaus, who's our product owner, he's not necessarily checking the team room maybe as much as we'd like. So I'm going to make sure I mention him so he gets an email, so he'll be a part of this conversation immediately. And I'll share that information out with the rest of the team. So it's possible that maybe someone else on the team already had that conversation. It could answer the question for me. If not, Klaus is going to get notified as well. And as I create that conversation, it's really built into the communication and the record for that particular story. Additionally, I'll see that conversation appear in the team room. So as we're learning more about what we're working on inside the sprint, everyone can stay on the same page. Some other aspects that are important here in team room are keeping the progress within the sprint in front of the team. So it really becomes an information radiator, so they can understand how they're doing in the sprint and are they tracking in a way that makes sense given the plans they created at the beginning of the sprint. You have some insight into velocity. The team can also quickly search on items. But in general, it's covering what the team really wants to do as they jump in VersionOne to update their progress and then see what's going on with the rest of the team. So once you get towards the end of the sprint and kind of finishing up the process of tracking at the team level, you'll want to kind of wrap up. Hopefully you got all the work done in the sprint and you pulled in more defects and stories because your velocity was so great. But we know a lot of times that's not the case, and there's work left over that didn't get fully completed. So the close sprint page provides an interface that streamlines that process. So as a team, you can review what you've already closed out in the sprint, and you can also take work that's not yet complete and drag it into the next one. So moving through the backlog, you can take the items that were completed, close them out. Items that are half done, you can split them. So really trying to streamline the process of transitioning from one sprint to the next. So that walks us through the end of the process. Hopefully you got some insights into how VersionOne can make Agile easy for the teams and allow you to pull them into this environment that gives you the team level capability, but additionally gives you program level and portfolio capabilities. And so, Lee, I'm going to turn it back over to you so you can set some context for the program level.
Okay. Thanks, Andy. And just want to add a little bit there is that the team rooms we're finding is being really well accepted and just embraced by the teams who want to be shielded, as Andy said, from the complexity of all the other things that are going on at the program portfolio levels. And if you happen to be looking at the conversations that Andy was showing and going, hey, that's not very agile, team members should be talking to each other, remember that often, especially in large enterprises, there are they're distributed teams, often dealing with huge gaps in time zone differences, and so we're finding that the conversations is really enhancing the ability of the teams to maintain cohesive forward momentum even when they are facing those challenges. So,
Lee, that's a good point. And one of the things that we also found there is that with conversations, a lot of times the face-to-face conversation, you can summarize that back in the conversations so that people that weren't involved in a one-on-one conversation can actually understand what you learned and spread that information out throughout the whole team.
Absolutely. All right, so team level Agile, again, most folks are familiar with that, and we just took a really quick tour as to how we can affect team level Agile within the VersionOne tool, and that's the base level. And then when we go to up to the program level, we are using what SAFE refers to sometimes as Agile Scaled 1. So this is the first level of scaling, and we know that the program level is really where all the activity is going on. This is where the complexity is really baked into enterprises, and this is the things that organizations have been struggling with for the past several years. Yeah, we can do this at the team. I can certainly get a potentially shippable increment of stories at the team level, but when we have teams that are working together to build something that has to coalesce into a set of features that no one single team can deliver, we know that the value is really not at the team level. The value is really being delivered at this program level. So the ability to have a framework such as SAFE that gives us some norms and some standards and some best practices for handling that is something that I think is welcome and obviously being embraced in the community. And we're going to look at next in Andy's next section of the demo to look at how we can align those local design, build, and test teams to coordinate their efforts so that we're delivering valuable features through the enterprise and not just delivering team-level stories. So, Andy, I'll kick it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Lee. And for all you program managers out there, I can certainly feel for you because your job's going to get more difficult as we move forward. If you think about how difficult it is to coordinate all the work that's going on today, and as the teams, if you're moving towards Agile, as your teams start to get more productive, they're able to deliver more. That means that those coordination points and those integration, those dependencies, they all happen a lot faster. So the program management really becomes a place in an Agile organization where there's a lot of squeeze that occurs. Because it's pretty easy for that portfolio layer to say, here's what we want, and the teams get really good at delivering out their stories. And so in the middle, you've got a lot to handle, and that's where it takes a pretty concerted, holistic approach to be successful with that program layer. And so I wanted to walk through some of the scenarios with we walked to the team level and we were focused more on stories. And so now we're scaling up to say, well, okay, those stories a lot of times, they're part of a larger thing. They're part of an epic that's part of a feature. And so I wanted to quickly go back to the portfolio level. So in this case, in our portfolio, we're looking at this business epic, and we're going to kind of focus in on one of those business epics. You can assume that I'm the epic owner now. I'm filling that role where I need to go and do some elaboration for the Cloud Call Center Release 1.0. There's already been some elaboration done, and most of the work for the Cloud Call Center is going to fall to the call center product. So I'm going to jump down to that layer, and I'm seeing now mostly features for that particular epic that's going on for my product. And I can go ahead and add an additional backlog item here and just type it as a feature. So I'm going to create a feature for call history. And I know that this feature is going to be something we're going to look to do in PSI 2. So I'll go ahead and just place it into that particular planning level. I'm also going to make sure I want to let the application know that it's part of the Cloud Call Center Epic. And then I could enter a swag. So swag in this case is that higher level estimate. One of the things that's really different when you get into Enterprise Agile and using the SAFe model is that you're not going to have all your stories built out right now as you start to do your planning on your features and building your feature roadmap. So swag's a place where you can put in that higher level planning item estimate. So you could be putting in story points here, or man months. I think SAFe generally recommends using story points so you have consistent units. But here I'm going to put in 5 for my swag. So that's the estimate for this feature, and then I'm going to go ahead and assign the type to feature. So now as I go ahead and look out, I can see here's a list of all my features, and this program backlog is something also that I can prioritize. So I'll move call history into the appropriate prioritization. And as you start doing this, what becomes helpful is to say, well, where, I can see a list of my features, I can prioritize them, but when are they going to get done? You can place planned end dates on the features, so that's possible. But at some point, you're going to want to see a timeline view, and that's the point behind the backlog timeline that we recently rolled out. So for my call center product, or potentially for the entire product suite, I can then view all the features that are planned out and get a feeling for when things are going to happen. So in this case, we can see that we've got the red line represents today, so it's very easy for me to tell where today is. I can see what's going on in PSI 1. There's a bar on the timeline that shows me when my PSI is ending, and I can plan out into the future. So I've started planning out PSI 2 here, and I think the SAFe recommends you plan the next 2 PSIs out, so you can have an idea of where you're heading with your release train. Below the actual timeline, you're seeing your organizational velocity. So what this swag is doing here is showing you, as you progress through time, do you have any points in time where the amount of work that you say you're going to have in play is more than you can traditionally handle or normally handle based on what you've done previously? And so as you're planning out into PSI 2 and PSI 3, you can start to make sure that the swag that you have at a certain point in time isn't creating a bottleneck for your organization, right? You're not overcommitting yourself to what you can actually get done. And you'll also be able to see your estimates. So you won't necessarily have estimates for the items in your future PSIs, but you will start to see estimates for PSIs that are underway or you've done in the past. And this will give you the ability to understand how does your initial swag that you're using, that higher level planning units, match up to the actual estimate that you saw as you continue to elaborate on your features and get them down to the story level. So this is one way that VersionOne helps you with making sure you're matching the actual capacity you have within your release train to the amount that you're putting into the plan. So helping with road mapping is one aspect of the backlog timeline. Another key benefit of it is the ability to understand progress. So if you look here at the current PSI, the red line clearly shows where we are today from a timing perspective, and then there's also progress bars on the particular features that are shown. And so you can see we've got a couple features already completed, so they were done ahead of their planned end date, and then we have a couple other features that are a little bit behind where you'd expect based on their start and end dates. So the backlog timeline can become a really valuable information radiator for the program when you want to have a time-focused view, understanding both what's coming in the future and also where we are with the items in our current PSI. So that's one element of program management and how we're helping that program manager after the items have been elaborated, communicate where things are, and you also start to have the ability to track dependencies within your program in VersionOne. And so I want to cover that next. So putting ourselves in the situation where we're going through PSI planning and the teams are starting to create stories, we have our different sprints, and as they're creating those stories, and I'll use delete RMA as an example here, they might be finding stories that have dependencies. So before we can finish delete RMA, we actually need to make sure update RMA is or enter RMA is completed. So I can create dependencies between any two stories by just clicking assign and then finding that particular backlog item, no matter where it relies within my overall organization. So once I've captured those dependencies, I'm now able to see for the PSI where all those dependencies are. So the dependency status icon here is showing green if, based on how these items are scheduled, the dependencies seem like they'll be fine. So if I took delete RMA and scheduled it to sprint 5, for instance, I'll notice that that dependency status icon turns yellow because there's an overlap warning. Since enter RMA is also in the same sprint, VersionOne is telling us that, hey, you need to watch out because you may have some conflict there in terms of when you can start working on delete RMA. You may not be able to get that done inside of this sprint. And so I could use that information to maybe make sure that I move delete RMA to the following sprint. So you do get some insight as you're planning the work. But one of the things that a program manager might ask themselves is, well, how many dependencies are there across my entire release train? Because that's where I want to spend my management focus. I want to make sure that I know exactly how those things are going because that's where I can help out those individual teams. If it's just teams delivering stories, they're gonna figure it out. But if one team's waiting on another, then I want to make sure I know about it. And there's a dependency report available that can give you that more focused view if you are a program manager. And so looking at this view, I'm seeing just the backlog items that have dependencies identified. On the left, we're seeing the upstream items. And on the right, we're seeing the items that are downstream. So what happens here is not only do I see holistically all the dependencies that are identified, I also can see any chains that are occurring. So enter RMA has to happen, and then I have to get update RMA and credit check done before I can get going on calculate shipping and process wizard. And look how many dependencies process wizard has before it can get started. So I'd really want to be focusing on trying to get the work on the left completed and pushed higher in the team backlogs if possible. I also can see from this view, and we've seen this already in a couple of other places, the insight into blocking issues. So in VersionOne, one of the things you can do is start blocking items and creating issues for them. And then we instrument the application in different places so you can start to see what those are and make sure they're being addressed. And so in this case, the credit card agreement not being signed, as that may be something that needs to happen through legal, and as the program manager, I could make sure that I'm following up with legal to make sure they know how important it is that gets completed for us to deliver on this PSI. So one final thing I wanted to cover in terms of the program manager and getting everyone on the same page within the release train is VersionOne makes it very easy to synchronize sprints across teams. So that's the synchronization and cadence is an important part of SAFe because it allows you to make those decisions that, as a program, as opposed to having a bunch of independent decisions made at different times. You're able to make those trade-off decisions better. So if I'm the program manager and I'm creating sprints for the next PSI, I'll go in here and create a sprint for a PSI 2 and just creating my first sprint. When I'm doing this, I'm creating it for the entire release train. So no matter if I'm looking at a rolled up view for the entire program or if I'm looking at just the call center product, we're going to see exactly the same sprint buckets as we navigate from one layer to the next. I'm sorry, I just want to try that one more time because I think my browser got held up a little bit. Yeah, so here I've switched to the call center product, and so now I'm still seeing those exact same sprint buckets. So everyone knows how to find this particular sprint. You don't have to worry about the naming from this team's sprints. You don't have to worry about making sure the dates are the same across those teams. It's very easy to keep teams in sync across your program. All right, one of the things we haven't covered so far is what happens then at the very granular level as you're trying to manage the progress within your program. How can you get some insights into kind of any changes that are occurring? And so VersionOne does have some reports that can help you understand your scope change. So if I'm the product owner or a program manager, someone who's interested in seeing within the PSI 1 for the call center product, what items have moved in and out of our sprints for sprint 5? I can go ahead and run the scope change report and get some insight into what's been added and removed and changed for this particular sprint. I could also do that for the PSI. So if we're seeing that our team has a lot of defects that come into the sprint after a particular point in time, then I'm able to create a baseline with my start date for that PSI and then use my end date as today and see between the start date and the end date what items have been added to my release, what items were removed, what has that change been, both from a very granular particular items as well as the net change in my counts, my estimate, and so forth. So this is a way that if you're starting to see the program and the PSI plans falling behind, you can start to get some insights into what might be causing that. Another report I wanted to show is just a dashboard view for the PSI. So I am able to get those burn downs for the PSI. So for all the stories I have in my particular release, the particular release trend I'm working on, how are we doing based on the original plan? Are we burning down as we expected? And I can also get some insights into how much scope change we might have had over time. So in some cases, you might find that you have to take a lot of work into your PSI and you expect some scope change. Right? So if your program is responsible for production issues, right, then you'd want to just account for that. And so you'd expect to see the total amount of estimate going up as you go through time, and you have some insight into that. Then you can drill down into the scope change report to see exactly what those items are. So that's a walkthrough of some of the program management capabilities VersionOne has. You can get some reporting to help you really understand what's going on from a progress perspective. You can get your high-level progress indication by looking at your backlog timelines. And you're also able to manage your dependencies and manage the coordination across teams in VersionOne to make sure that you know what's going on and you can work with the teams to get the work scheduled to the proper sprints. So at this point, Lee, I want to turn it back over to you so we could move into some of the portfolio level aspects.
All right, thanks, Andy. Good coverage of the program level. So we talked about the program level being the place where the complexity really just gets tangled inside of there, and that's been an area that we've been making strides in over the last few years, and SAFe is giving us even more clarity, a way to kind of get daylight between the moving pieces in there, but also assimilate them into something that's working. The next layer up in the big picture is that of the portfolio, and that is the scaled twice. So agility scaled twice, and this is that level that we often hear people wish actually existed in their Agile efforts. So I don't know how many times I've heard people say, wow, I wish my executives would be involved with this. In many organizations, Agile has kind of advanced to the point that it's happening at the program level, where there are teams of teams building things. But there's still a big gaping hole there for the involvement of the folks at the very top of the decision-making chain here. And that's one of the things I really like about the Scaled Agile framework, is it's very explicit about how involved that level of the organization needs to be, because frankly that's where the strategic direction of the organization is being set, and where the funding of the activities, the funding of the initiatives, which eventually trickle down to epics and then features and then stories and then tasks. That's where it all starts. So it makes a whole lot of sense to have that level of the organization also plugged into and really being an umbrella that overarches all of the enterprise's Agile activities. So again, not going to drill down into this, making assumptions that either you've seen this before or you'll have access to the website or the books that drill down into this. But this is just to set up the next part of the demo, where Andy's going to talk about looking at how VersionOne can aid in a safe implementation from the portfolio perspective. So Andy, I'm going to hand it right back over to you.
All right, thanks, Lee. All right, so let's go back to the backlog tree and look again at our portfolio level. So this is where a lot of the decisions are made, and as Lee mentioned, trying to figure out what the right thing to do is that's an important part of the equation. And there's also some element of governance, making sure, I've heard from a lot of people that when you go and start looking at the amount of work in progress across an organization, it's before they can start doing any new work, they have so much they have to get done to just meet their the projects underway. Limiting what comes into development is a challenge. Right? It's very easy to say yes. It's very hard to finish projects, finish the epics you're working on. And so the portfolio view here, again, is just a backlog of your epics, and they can get prioritized up or down. And hopefully you're going to be prioritizing those using the concepts that SAFe represents. And so I want to show you the details on an epic first off, and a couple of fields that we can then talk about in reporting. So we already discussed swag a little bit. That's your high-level estimate field. So that's the place where you can put, before you know all the user stories, how big do we think this item is? And in addition to that, you're able to put a value scale. So value scale, if you've followed the SAFe closely, Dean kind of outlined 3 different pieces of value that you'd want to use. One of them is the user value. One of those is time value, and another is kind of the risk, opportunity value. Right? And that's basically a guideline to get you started in thinking about the cost of delay and what really you should be working on. And in version 1, you can use the more simple value scale here, or you could create custom fields to model the particular way that you're approaching capturing value in your organization. And so those fields are here. The other fields I want to point out were the ability to create custom fields. So another key concept from SAFE is the ability to, the need for doing capacity allocations. So really looking at where are we spending our time? Does where we spend our time match where we want to be spending our time? And if not, what's causing that, and adjusting our plans accordingly. So with those fields in mind, I wanted to show you some reports that you can use within our analytics solution to help drive some insights into how you're managing your portfolio. And so the first report I want to touch on, and I'm just going to jump over into the analytics solution, is looking at your backlog by the weighted shortest job first. And this basically is just the concept of, rather than just looking at value, you also have to look at how much investment it's going to take to deliver something. And so this is just getting bang for your buck, right? And here I've created a report that's just dividing the value in version 1 by the swag. And if you created custom fields to manage this with more detail, right, you can create a calculation here that takes into consideration more attributes. And based on this sorting, UX maintenance and accounting integration are popping out as the top 2 items we should be doing. And so if we go back and look at our portfolio prioritization, we could start using that information and say, well, maybe we should be rethinking things, or possibly the value that we've identified really isn't accurate. Maybe we should rethink some of the value metrics we have, because something led us to prioritize things this way. So really getting to the point where people understand what led you to make a certain decision. That's kind of the concept behind using the weighted shortest job first, providing that check on what you may feel like is right, just to make sure that it is when you do consider both the value it provides as well as the cost. Another report that's here is a dashboard that you could use for your program and portfolio team. So what do they care about? So if you're looking at thinking about governance, a lot of times you're also thinking about, at a high level, how are we doing in our PSI for this program or for that program? So you can have a place here where you create a program status report that's pretty simple. It just gives you the list of the features, the health. So here, health could be representing whether the program manager expects this particular feature to get completed as it was planned within the PSI. We also have the ability to start really looking at your capacity allocations. So one of those is, for the release, which epics are we working on? For this PSI, we're spending most of our time on this cloud call center, the first release of it. We also can look at our capacity allocation of stories versus defects. So is that the right percentage? Do we want it to be around 20%? Or is that much higher than we'd expect? If so, how are we going to respond to that? Are we going to make it even higher so that we can burn down the backlog of defects? What's causing it to be so high? You can start digging in from a program management perspective to make sure that you are addressing any issues that are arising based on something being different from your other programs that are going on. And then finally, you have that pie chart that you kind of see on the big picture, the ability to look at your investment allocations, and based on the stories that you're delivering within your different epics, you can look at how are we delivering to our different investment themes. Just using here the investment theme drop down, I can see we're spending about 40% on innovation, 9% on 10% on maintenance, and then about half the work really hasn't been tied to a particular investment team. So we may have some places where we can improve our maturity around tracking those investment themes. So that's an overview of the reporting and some of the dashboarding that can be helpful, as you go ahead and start trying to both make sure that you have the right prioritization, and then also you're putting your capacity in the right areas. So another element that I wanted to focus on is not as much tracking progress and understanding capacity allocation, but that Kanban view that's important in order to make sure that you're taking in the right amount of work into the organization and not putting too much work in progress. So in version 1, the Kanban page here allows you to see how are my epics flowing through my portfolio. You can break it out by business epic and architectural epic. And then also using some principles from Kanban, you're able to start setting WIP limits, so work in progress limits for your different status values. The flow you see here is something that can be configured to match the different phases you have in your organization for your epics. It could be simpler than this, or it could be something that has more values. And this becomes a helpful information radiator for the program and portfolio team. In this case, right now we're seeing that the analysis is over the WIP limit, so it's showing up in red. So we might decide that, hey, we need to stop working on that. We're disrupting our ability to focus on implementing the current features underway, or epics underway. The other thing you can do if you're using this as more of an information radiator is the items in implementation, you'll often want to drill down and see, well, how is this going? How are we doing on Cloud Call Center? And just having a progress bar doesn't tell the full story, because what you care about usually is when am I going to get a certain feature. And so you can drill in to view the dashboard for your epic. So the epic dashboard allows you to see your feature progress. So how did Cloud Call Center break down into my features? What's the status of each of those features? You can also, at the top, see the backlog progress. So how did we elaborate this epic from the standpoint of stories over time? For this epic, since we have this red bar very high at the beginning, and it doesn't grow very much, that tells us that we did a lot of elaboration all the way down to the story level, the very beginning of creating this particular epic. And now we're starting to burn up on the green, and it's going to take us quite a while to finish burning up all the remaining work for this first release of Cloud Call Center. So that's epic drill down, and how you can use the Kanban board as an information radiator for your portfolio thinking. So at this point, Lee, I wanted to turn it back over to you to see if we had any questions. I think we've covered the portfolio and also kind of summarize what we've covered. So I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Andy. Yeah, so this is just a summary of the backlog model in SAFe, the portfolio overarching the program, and then the programs actually being implemented by teams. So we took a bottom-up approach. This is just a top-down look at this as well. The bottom line here is that SAFe is a framework that allows us to define and deliver value in a just-in-time process. We didn't talk about it a whole lot here, but the concept of flow, product flow, is really the central tenet around which SAFe is built. And if you've had the opportunity to listen to Dean Leffingwell describe this, he really talks about flow and the work of Don Reinertsen and the influence of that work from the Lean community on this framework. So we've got about 10 minutes left, and thank you for you folks who are sending the questions in. Have a bunch of those stacked up here, and want to get to as many as we possibly can in the time that remains. But before we do that, Andy, I'm going to have you jump in here, interject right at this point before we get to the questions and answers, and just summarize what you walked through in terms of the tooling.
Sure, thanks, Lee. So I'll go top down this time as opposed to the order we covered in. But at the portfolio level, we're allowing you to do your capacity allocation, so understand where the time is going. Investment themes is one key example of that. We also give you the ability to capture epics and visualize them through a Kanban system, so you can start using the visual management to really understand how that work is flowing through your organization. At the program level, we talked about the program backlog and the ability to capture features. Then, once you've done that, the ability to lay them out on a timeline so you can see what's going to happen when, and also use that as an information radiator for progress within the current PSI. And then I also spent some time talking about release planning and getting ready for your PSI, managing the dependencies across team, and having the ability to focus management attention on places where you do have dependencies occurring. And finally, at the team level, the key, we walk through the process of sprint planning and then tracking work and reviewing work, but the key really becomes providing an interface where the team members come in and can collaborate in VersionOne, as opposed to being just tracking their work. They're actually using VersionOne as a way to further understand and communicate across the team members what they're working on.
Okay. Thanks, Andy. All right, so we're about to get to some questions, but before we get started with the Q&A, I just want to remind everyone and encourage everyone on the call today that you to start a trial with VersionOne, and you can see firsthand how the product can help your organization. You should see down in the chat section of the bar on the left or right-hand side, however you may have configured your browser. In the chat window, there is a link. It says Start a VersionOne trial today, and if you click on that, that will take you out to a place where you can sign up for a trial and really just have a sandbox to use to try out some of these concepts and see how this might be useful for you. So let's go ahead and jump on some questions here. So I'm just going to go through a few of these, and Andy, I'm going to pitch these over to you. So first question is, SAFE talks about resource allocation. You talked about it a little bit. Could you recap how we do resource planning and management in VersionOne?
Yeah, and let me go into, I can also go into a little more detail on that, because I didn't cover that with my first run through, so I think that is something we could spend a little more time talking about. And I think this starts with an understanding that the nature of resource allocation in a truly agile organization, which most of us aren't in something that's gotten to the point where everything is flowing perfectly, right? There's a lot of room for improvement. But I think SAFE's getting us to a place where we can start to make program level decisions for the PSI. And so in the example we went through, I talked about having 3 different product teams, right? And so if unified ticketing is an example of a product team that maybe the other products rely upon, right? So they have an integration point, and unified ticketing has their own things they're trying to get done, but they also are accepting requests for work from chit chat and from call center. That can be a place where you start to have to manage those bottlenecks, right? You want to make sure that when call center starts to say, hey, we're going to do this, that unified ticketing can support what they're trying to accomplish. And some of the ways you can work around that are having your team members be able to move around a little bit more, and having the call center take up on more work instead of just throwing things as unified ticketing. Maybe they can start expanding what they do. But at some level, you're going to want to be able to communicate when call center has a feature that unified ticketing needs to support. And so when we go back to the backlog tree, and earlier we had created a, let me go look at call center. So if I'm the person who identified call history, right, that's something that we want to get done for this call center product. But in order to deliver call history, I'm going to need to make sure that I integrate with unified ticketing. So I can go ahead and create a child backlog item, and so I'll just make that backlog item be call recording lookup. And I'm going to put that over into the PSI2 for unified ticketing, because I know I'm going to need it then. And from there, they're gonna then, and let me go ahead and put a type on this of a sub-feature. So this is something, a sub-feature you could define as something that must get done by the team that you're requesting in order for you to deliver your feature. So now if I'm the person who's focused on a call center, then I'm going to be able to see that call history requires some work. It has a sub-feature that's going to need to get done by in PSI2 by the unified ticketing product team. And at the same time, I'm going to be able to go look at what's going on in PSI2 for unified ticketing, and I'm going to see that show up in my program backlog. And so this is a way that as if I'm the program manager for unified ticketing, I can start making sure I'm prioritizing all the requests coming in at that feature level. So we still haven't gone down to creating the stories within the PSI, but before we go into PSI planning, I'm going to want to understand what's going on there. And if I start to see that I'm getting more requests than I can handle, or it's starting to be something where we don't have a lot of buffers involved, then as an organization, as a overall program, we can start looking at how are we going to then handle those issues. Can I move my resources around? What makes sense? And so VersionOne lets you start doing that high-level planning, divvying out those features to the teams that are impacted.
All right. Thanks, Andy. We've got about 3 minutes left by my account here. Wanted to ask one more question. That's probably the last one we'll be able to get in. And this is kind of a combination of two questions that I've seen coming in here. So the question is combined, how can I use VersionOne to indicate and distinguish risks and also non-functional requirements?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about risk earlier in the sense of one kind of risk that comes up in a project is if you're in your team room and a team member finds a blocking issue. So they could be saying, well, I have this blocking issue, so I have to, there's a bug in a library. And so I can capture that as that's kind of a risk to the particular story getting completed, which may also have an impact on the PSI objectives as a whole. So that's one kind of risk. The other kind of risk is when you don't know something. So if you're doing elaboration, if we go back up and put ourselves in the mindset of the portfolio level, where I have Cloud Call Center here, that's my business epic, and I'm going ahead and defining the features, and I've got the right people in the room to break down the features, and we realize that we don't have a lot of insight into how authentication works. We're going into a new technology with that. We need to understand it better. I could start creating work items to capture that information. So I could go ahead and create a additional backlog item for a in this case, my type could be a feature, but the feature here is just spike of authentication approaches. All right, and that's something I could use and maybe we say the swag on this is only one. It's something that's going to be small, but I'm going to use this spike of authentication approaches to drive out risk from my project. So if you're just identifying risks, that's not as helpful as taking the initiative to remove those risks, right? Mitigate them by potentially spending some energy to learn some more, try things out, do a proof of concept. And so I think that's a pretty standard approach for a lot of Agile teams is doing spikes of things. And from here you could start creating stories and using that a spike feature as a way to capture any work that has to get done ahead of time for this particular cloud call center epic, you might put that in the PSI before you really get underway with that particular PSI. And this, you can use a similar approach to non-functional requirements. So for a non-functional requirement, it could either get, the real way you can approach that is you have a testing effort to know whether or not you're meeting it. So what do you want to attach that effort to? You could, if you had a non-functional requirement of this first release of Cloud Call Center coming out at a performance of under 2 seconds per request, you could create a story for that. You could create a feature for that to really capture the work you're doing, or you could treat it as acceptance criteria on each story. So you'd really want to set up how you're going to track that from a work perspective in VersionOne. And once you have that strategy figured out, you can then create the backlog items to make sure the work gets done.
Great, thanks, Andy. I want to pop back into the last slide here in the deck for today, just to remind you of a few things here. We want to thank everyone for joining us for the webinar today. We're right upon time. There are some next steps that we would encourage you to do. One would be to start a trial with VersionOne. There's no better way to figure out the capabilities that are there or what you might be able to do with this than to get in there and kind of click around in a safe sandbox. There's also a forum, the VersionOne's Agile Managers Forum, as on LinkedIn, and we'll have this recording and the slides posted out there, and that's also a way to follow up with additional questions. Directly associated with Scaled Agile, which is Dean Leffingwell's organization, there's a monthly newsletter you can sign up for at community.scaledagile.com. And then there's also safe training and certification and courseware available at scaledagileacademy.com. So we want to thank Dean Leffingwell and his organization for